Hello and welcome to AIL TV and welcome to Africa Security Update with David Otto. Today, here in the studio, of course, with COVID-19, we are also observing the laws of social distancing. So, David Otto, you are on. Tell us what you have today.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Thank you to Africans in London TV. This is Africa Security Update by David Otto, the Director for Counterterrorism and Organized Crime for Global Risks International. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have a very special program, which, of course, a lot of you have been involved. A lot of you have been following the Black Lives Matter protest. This came as a result of the recent killing of George Floyd in Minnesota. He couldn't breathe and he stopped breathing. So he passed away, and there has been a backlash of protests. People are calling for certain statutes that reflect the slave trade, generation. Organizations that are linked to slavery to be removed. Here in the United Kingdom, we've seen a lot of protests. So we thought this is an important, discussion to have. But at the center of this, what we've decided to do today is to bring you a distinguished team of, Black officers, from the Black community. These are people that, within three of them, they have more than 100 years experience in the police force. So, they would give you an insight that you've never had before. They will talk about the way forward, to the Black Lives Matter protest. They would give you an idea as to what is actually going on within the police institution, because they have experience, they continue to have experience within this institution. So they'll be talking about their own experience as Black officers, within the institution, but also to advise those who are looking at engaging with the police from the Black community, to advise those who want to join the police in the United Kingdom, to advise those who are currently in the police, from the Black community, on how to go about managing the current chaos that we are seeing today. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would announce to you that today we have, Janet Hills, who is the first chair of the Black Police Association and the first lady chair. Let me make that very clear, of the Black Police Association. She also was the president of the National Black Police Association, but she's still involved in that today. She has a huge experience. She's currently serving with the Metropolitan Police, and she has a huge experience, not just as a police officer, but also as a female police officer. So she would talk a lot about finding herself not just being Black, but also being female within the Metropolitan Police. So, I will get to Janet a little bit soon, but let me also introduce to you two distinguished, gentlemen. One of them being Dr. Leroy Logan. Dr. Leroy Logan is a member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. They call that the MBE, and he's been a superintendent of police, in the Metropolitan Police for God knows since maybe when I was born, But I'm thinking he's going to tell me more about that. I'm not saying he's old, but Dr. Leroy is somebody that we've interacted a lot, and he has recently written a book, Closing the Ranks, and his life being a cop. I think this is a book that is worth, for anyone who wants to understand the policing in the UK as it relates to the Black community, as it relates to an inclusive community. If you want to have all these details, you've got to buy this book. It's presently being advertised. Please, if you want to get this book, at the end of this program, I'm going to give you the link, because you've got to get it on your table, because it's full of a lot of things that you will never be able to hear from somewhere else. And then, let me come to able gentleman, who is Dr. Victor Olise. He's been a staunch member within the community. Dr. Victor Olise, has the Queen's Police Medal, and he is the board of trustee for the organization known as the National Association for the Care and Resettlement of Offenders. So Dr. Victor Olise has been also a chief superintendent of police at the Metropolitan Police. He was previously a police officer at the Surrey Police. So within these three gentlemen, they've got a huge amount of experience in the police. Not just being black officers, but being officers who are seen as as blacks. I think they would explain these dynamics, because I was trying to get this idea, and I'm sure that they would explain this. Now, before we proceed, what I want to make very clear is that when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we're not saying that other lives don't matter. We're not saying that only Black lives matter. But what we're saying is, the Black community are experiencing or have been experiencing an institutional racism within the police force. Now, the question is that still happening with the recent murder of George Floyd, not just in the UK, but in the United States? Because mind you, these three individuals don't just have experience within the Black police in the UK, they do have experience within the Black police officers in other countries. So I would want to begin with, our able lady, Janet Hills. Janet, you are a police officer. You're Black and you're female, and you've been in the police for almost 3 decades now. Can you tell us about your experience when you joined the police force, and in terms of the way you were seen by your colleagues, your community, and how you saw yourself, and what is happening now in this era of Black Lives Matter?
So I started policing in 1991, and I was sent to Brixton, which was my first ever station that I worked at. It was interesting because coming from Croydon, we didn't have much links back then. You don't have the sort of links that you have now in terms of travel. So I'd never really been to Brixton. I'd heard so much about it based on, riots that had happened in the 80s. So going there for me, I was quite, I guess, a little bit sort of scared, if I can say that, because of all of everything that I'd heard about Brixton. But my experience of being there couldn't have been better. So in terms of my team and where I was working, I had a real experience of officers that taught me my trade, basically. Then in the community, I always remember this when my first day out walking. So when you arrive at the station back then, you did about 10 weeks street duties, where they didn't really let you out on patrol at all. So you did a lot of things in terms of staying together as a group, patrolling in a group, finding out your area. But when I took my first walking patrol with another colleague, I couldn't have been greeted better by the community that I bumped into. They were really receptive to me. They were saying hello to me, and I felt really welcome. I understand that there hadn't been a Black female at Brixton for a while, but nonetheless, I felt really welcomed by the community. I stayed there for about 15 years, and then I decided to specialise. I went to Sutton. I joined an organised group, the Special Operations Group, that were dealing with organised immigration crime. And then I went back to Brixton around about 2010 on promotion as a detective sergeant. So that is my current role now. I'm a detective sergeant, and then my full-time role is that of the chair. of the Metropolitan Black Police Association, sorry, of the chair of the Metropolitan Black Police Association. So with that in mind, what I will say is that 91 to now, there have been changes. So I can say that the way we were policing back in 91 is similar in terms of what we do and how we interact with communities, but there have been changes within that. But there's this stubbornness, I guess, around race, which hasn't seen the kind of progression, especially in my service, that I would want to see. And that, for me, requires uncomfortable conversations, but something in which the organisation needs to get comfortable with. So for me, there is a lot more work to be done in terms of the organisation and their aspirations and where they'd want to be, but that takes action. We need to do more in terms of actions and less of the talking.
Yeah, but Janet, that's a good point. I mean, you spoke about your first experience being around Brixton. Of course, we've had the Brixton Riots, which was as a result of the stop and search, as you know. Tell us more about that. Being a female officer, did you have a knee on your neck?
Did I have, sorry?
Did you have a knee on your neck?
No, I wouldn't say I had a knee on my neck. No, I wouldn't say that at all. And what I would say was that it was challenging in so much that I was a female that happened to be black, but what is portrayed of me is a black female. So what you then have is a negativity before the fact that as a woman, I had so much more to offer. So that for me was challenging. The behaviours and some of the language at the time, again, was challenging. But there was a lot more work, or it felt like there was a lot more work happening within policing. If you recall, I joined in 91, 93 was the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence. And the organisation, from that perspective, did try to build on the label that had been given to them back then in terms of that Macpherson inquiry in 1999 of being institutionally racist. So from that perspective, they did try to build and continue to try and build. But when you have a lack of senior leaders who look at the communities that they serve, who are not in a position to be part of the decision making, then that does pose challenges, because the only lens they have to assess things is the one of their own lived experience, which isn't necessarily ours. So from that perspective, we do need more officers from an African, Caribbean or Asian background within policing, but then within policing, we need to acknowledge our cultural competencies and allow for that talent to shine through.
Let me get to, before I speak to Dr. Victor, let me first of all speak to Dr. Leroy. Dr. Leroy, you've been in the police, since 1983, I guess. As a black male who happened to be a police officer, what is your experience, during that period? Of course, Janet spoke about this Brixton riot. Now we've got the Black Lives Matter rioting as a result of the killing of George Floyd. What is your experience? I mean, do you see any difference between what used to happen then, when you started, and now, in terms of the behavior of the police?
Well, I think in those early days we had the SUS law, which was a very, very draconian act of Parliament, which was repealed shortly after I joined in '83 and replaced by the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. And that tightened things up, because with days of the SUS law, you could be arrested on suspicion that you might be about to commit an offence. And as a result of that, you could be detained. And in those days, you could be detained for an indiscriminate amount of time, because the Police and Criminal Evidence Act tidied up all of the issues around detention of someone and getting reviews at periodic times of your detention. And so that sort of fear factor that used to be created, because as a young man in the 70s and 80s, I was always scared of getting, being a victim of the sus law. So we don't have that unaccountability and transparency, but it's far from perfect. I mean, there is a lot more things that can be done to ensure that officers are more accountable, not only externally, because we're seeing officers now have body cameras, so that helps. It also helps the public to know about what the officers are doing, but also assisting the officers to know if the public are trying to accuse them of something, and it's not the case. So that has been a real support. Unfortunately, some officers don't put their body cameras on as they should, and that needs to be tightened up. But you still see the disproportionalities now with stop and search, and black people, in particular black men, are 8 times more likely to be stopped than their white counterparts. We've seen a disproportionate number of people being tasered. Only recently, they published figures that black people are almost 10 times more likely to be tasered than their white counterparts. And 80% of the DNA database is black people, and 80% of the gang matrix is black young men. So, there's a lot of systemic failures, certain amount of racial profiling, similar to what we had in the 70s and 80s. But I would like to think that we can go back to, I think, the watershed of activities through the Macpherson inquiry that looked into the death of Stephen Lawrence, and how, those recommendations that
I think we lost Dr. Leroy there. Dr. Victor, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, I think we lost Dr. Leroy there. While he comes back, is he back online? Dr. Leroy, can you hear me? Sometimes these connections can be a bit of a pain, but I'm sure that he would be able to get back. Dr. Leroy, are you there? Okay, so while we wait for Dr. Leroy to get back, let me come to you, Dr. Victor. I mean, the reason why I came to you last is because you've been in the police for more years than any of your colleagues that are here with you today. I mean, you started the police in Surrey in 1982, and then you moved on to London Met. So you've gone through the experience of the Brixton Riots. You went through the murder of Stephen Lawrence. The London Riots and the killing of McDougall. What is your experience? I mean, in terms of the police being their community and the community being the police. Do you see that the police is for the black community, or do you see that or is the black community working with the police from your experience?
So thank you, David. And I mean, in my length of time in the police service, 35 years, there were many changes. But the sad thing was for me, and is for me today, when you look at some of the things that are happening, some of the things we see in our television screens, in our social media messages in the UK, some of the things we see in other democratic countries like the US, and in particular, issues around race, it leaves me feeling really sad that I feel that we've probably gone back further than where we were when I joined the police in '82. So let me explain what I mean by that. So I joined the police from university. Although there's some policing in our family background, my grandfather was a police officer back in Nigeria.
Yeah.
But, my intention wasn't to join the police. I'd never considered it. I studied biochemistry at university, so when it came to finishing my degree, I was really open to look for work of what to do. And at the time, the police in the UK were going through what I can describe as soul searching, and it's very similar today. And they were going through this process of trying to improve their image and make them appear more of a service for every sections of the community.
Yeah.
So they were looking at, one of the ways of looking at doing that is looking to recruit graduates and looking to recruit more black people. And I'll say black people distinctly because at that time, the issue of what we describe as BAME, black, Asian and minority ethnic, wasn't really an issue. The issue then was about race, was about black people, was about trying to address that. So the police were looking to actually recruit black people then, in addition to the standard to everybody else that were trying to recruit more generally white people. So, and I looked into it because a friend went to, the police used to do it like a 3-day induction for graduates. So they take them in for 3 days and show them all the things that the police can do and try and sell the job to them. A friend did that, came back, said it was wonderful. So I applied, and I applied to join Surrey Police, Kent Police, and the Metropolitan Police. Surrey Police came back very quickly. I had the interview, I got accepted, and I started working Surrey in '82. First black person to join Surrey Police. Surrey's got several big towns. Guildford, I was stationed in Guildford, which was a big town. Middle class, wealthy, educated. And my experience, early days experience, was, for me, luckily, I got accepted internally because I played sport.
Yeah.
I took away most of the discussions about colour, race, discrimination. But in patrolling, it was a different thing altogether because, people looked at me as if I was strange. When I went out on patrol with colleagues and people asked for directions and I would answer, but they were looking at my white colleagues and wouldn't look at me. And it made you feel really uncomfortable. I don't think there was anything malicious in that. I think it's probably people discomfort in the way that they've never seen a black person in uniform in the county force. So you could understand that. But in addition to that, there were some nasty encounters, when I was patrolling, particularly on a Friday, Saturday night. Occasions people will come along, people who've been drinking, and I'm in full uniform to call you the N-word, what you're doing wearing the uniform. So that made you feel really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I had conversations with colleagues who would say, well, if we arrested them for public order, then, it would kick off a big melee. I'm sure you'll be all right. You'll be able to cope with it. And again, not being malicious, but all those things built up and was, undermined your confidence, questioned your decision to become part of this institution. And I remember then we used to do lots of visits to London, so young people who would take to Young Offenders Institute, prisoners would take back to prisons in London. And I remember getting there and the abuse, I used to get from the young people in the Young Offenders Institution, you're a coconut, you're a house N, you're an enemy. And, the prisons, once or twice, people throw things out their cells because, there's a black guy in uniform. So all those things shaped and questioned why you wanted to do this particular work. But I have to say, I joined, one, because it paid well. And when I joined, although I've got to say my parents were concerned because of the risk to my safety rather than anything else. But they soon accepted that. And I enjoyed the people I worked with. And I felt I could get over the difficulties that I faced in the street most of the time. And my colleagues were, protective. So those early years were a really learning experience. And I've got to say, I got through it because of some of the colleagues, some of the friends that I made in the police who were really, really good people and they supported you through.
Yeah.
But don't get me wrong, you don't take away from some of the difficulties in terms of discrimination, racism, and the overt hostility that you got on the street for being a black police officer.
Yeah, I mean, let me push in another question. You know, we welcome back Leroy's back. You know, we'll get back to you, Dr. Leroy, Dr. Victor. I mean, you with your experience, you know, I mean, you and I have met sometime, and we talked about your role, you know, in the Met Police, you know, to kind of encourage Black Africans or you know Black people to join the police. You know, with all your experience, you know, being a Black police officer, which you just said now, how are you able to, you know, tell young people to join the police when you had all these experiences? I mean, and did the system change for you, or has the system changed after you?
Well, the system is gradually changing, but there's still difficulties. Don't get me wrong. You know, so as an example, so today. Or you know, 2 months ago, when you look at the government stats for recruitment, the percentage of Black and Asian young people who join in the police are just under a quarter of everyone who's applying to join and getting through, so 23%. But sadly, 26% of Black, Asian and minority ethnic officers are leaving the police service. So there's more leaving than the more joining. So two things there. One, it takes away this notion that Black people, Asian people don't want to join the police, because clearly they do. But it also still raises this problem. Why are they leaving in larger numbers? So your question, you know, would I encourage a young Black person to join the police today? Yes, I would, for a number of reasons. And the police is not any difficult for many other public sector organizations. You know, we've just been seeing some of the things that have been going on with Black staff who are working in the health service with COVID-19, some of them being forced to work on the front line where their risks are higher. And I've read many reports, and I'm sure you have, where, you know, those Black staff who've been interviewed have been saying they've not been able to complain because they feel pressure on them, they feel ostracized, they get intimidated, so they don't complain, they don't show resentment, they just get on and do the work, but they're doing that work at the front line. They're more at risk than their non-Black colleagues. So there's problems in other public sector institutions. But with the police, while I would encourage young Black men to join, I'd be very clear with them that, you know, there will be challenges, there will be difficulties, there will be people who, you know, who will be wearing the uniform alongside them, albeit a small minority, who will be discriminatory. There will be people in community who would challenge them, their own people, because they'll see them as selling out. But look, the job is a well-paid job. It's secure from an employment perspective. It gives you an opportunity to make a difference in terms of, you know, helping society deal with some of the challenges that it faces. And I'm not just talking about crimes now. You know, I take one example. We know that people who suffer from mental health, Black people who suffer from mental health, are treated disproportionately by the police. Now, by being in the police service, and it needs to be in numbers, you can bring an understanding to your colleagues who might assume that a Black person they see acting in a way that might be described as dangerous, as different, is necessarily dangerous. You know, a type of assumption they won't make with a white person. I think Black people being in the police service can have that conversation and actually moderate their non-Black colleagues' behaviour.
Yeah.
Equally, if we get the right number of Black people in the police service, we can start seeing a change. And what I mean by that, if you take over the last 15, 20 years, the number of women in the police service has increased significantly. More importantly, the number of women in really senior position in the police service have increased significantly. That combination of number and position of influence is making a significant difference to women's progression in the police service. Now, if we can get into the same position when we've got Black, Asian people joining the police in numbers and rising through the ranks, and this is going to take years, we can get into a position where we're actually making a significant difference to the culture of the police, and one that is better at providing services for the black community.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Lisa. Let me, you made a very good point. The police job is well paid and secured. At the same time, let me ask this question to Dr. Leroy, who's just come back. At the same time, the police has been described as institutionally racist towards black people. Now, this is just the black people. Now, let's talk about the senior police officers like yourselves. Dr. Leroy, did you find the police job to be secured, well paid, and therefore, comfortable for you, or was the discomfort in terms of the institutional racism more than the comfort?
Well, apologies for my phone overheating. I've never had that before. Hence it cutting out. So obviously I was talking too much hot air before it just cut out the phone. But no, I think it's the point that Victor just said about the whole issue of a reflective organization. And the more reflective you have, and the more those people are an ambassador of your organization, the more it actually shows that the internal culture is in a better place. The fact that you are 4 to 5 times more likely to leave the organization in the first 2 years is an indication of the hostile environment. So when I joined, a lot of the people I joined with are no longer in the organization. They didn't get to 30 years. And as a result of that, in large numbers, because of what they had to survive, the name calling, the casual racism as it was then. And, if you're very clear in your values and your beliefs, then you will stand up for yourself. And I remember when I joined, I was 26. So I was much older than most of the officers who were in their late teens, early 20s. So, and I was married, I had a child, my first child, and as a result of that, I wasn't reliant on my peer group as friends and colleagues. So I could stand up for myself. I knew the area from London. I had my sphere of colleagues and friends I've had for years from school. So I could stand for myself. And then because there was a recruiting initiative for black and minority ethnic officers, there was quite a few of us in training school at that time. And a lot of us were still involved in forming the Black Police Association 11 years later. So, having that network of people of African, Caribbean, Asian origin, we were able to survive a bit better than those on the fringes or those who didn't feel comfortable associated with black officers. Because in those days, they liked to divide and rule. They didn't want black officers to actually stay together. If you were seen talking to another black officer, they say, "What are you up to?" And they're calling you. They got this view that we must be plotting something, and that wasn't the case. But that divide and rule continued for a lot of officers. But once we got that critical mass of people saying, "No, we're going to speak for not only ourselves within the organization, but for the black community and build bridges instead of barriers," that gave us an opportunity to say we have a unique role to play in the organization. And I'm really pleased that 25 years later, we are still in existence and, under the leadership of Janet. So I think it's really important that the black community recognize our longevity and how we know that the police service is better, being more reflective and building bridges with the community than barriers.
Thank you very much. Let me, now that you talked about let me get to Janet, because I think it's important to have this discussion. Dr. Victor mentioned that more women have joined the Met Police, for the record number of time, perhaps. So, Janet, you're still a serving officer,
yes.
in the Met Police, and you are the you were the first chair, lady chair of the Black Police Association. Of course, you were also the president of the National Black Police Association. You currently very much engaged at the very top, in terms of decisions. How are you encouraging Black women to join the police, and how are you encouraging them to stay? Are there any incentives for Black women to join and stay in the police, considering the lack of trust that exists between the police and the Black community?
So, what Victor said about having women represented within the police service is absolutely spot on. In terms of the Metropolitan Police, we're currently around 27-28% of women in policing, which is fantastic. It's awesome. We've seen the fact that they are across all of the ranks. So from your PC right up to the commissioner now, who is Cressida Dick, MBE. No, she's Dame Cressida Dick, actually. So, we've got a full range of that. But then what I would expect to see, and which I haven't seen, is the fact that Black women within that gender strand are having the same
progression,
the same sort of opportunities, the same sort of reflection in terms of across all the ranks. When you look at where we are as Black women, not even our Black men, Black women, we are severely underrepresented. In fact, we make up a quarter of the sort of African, Caribbean, Asian collective. So, 3/4 of men, and you've got a quarter that are women. And then within the gender strand, we're even smaller in terms of our numbers. We're even smaller in terms of our influence and our reach. And that shouldn't have anything to do with me being a Black woman. Because when we're being assessed on the fact that we are women. But the stubbornness around Black inhibits us and inhibits our progression. We've seen a number of Black females that have made it to the top, all of whom have retired now. And we've recently just had a female from Hampshire, Dr. Alison Hadari, who has left Hampshire on promotion as a commander into the Met, which is absolutely heartwarming to know that we've got a Black female that is representing, but the onus on her to be visible and present is something that we shouldn't have to expect. We shouldn't have to expect because you are a rarity in policing or in your community, that then you then take on all of the sort of years of burden that exists. So from that regard, the organisation needs to understand intersectionality across all the protected characteristics. I've just mentioned race and gender, but race feeds into virtually all of the protected characteristics where you do see a different standard of delivery of service when it comes to the fact that you've got the Black before any of them, which is something that they don't recognise. When I talk about the Black Police Association, whenever it comes down to recruitment, it's kind of just left to me because we're trying to recruit Black communities, but we have Black people with disabilities, we have Black people who are women, we have Black people who are LGBT, we have Black people that are in a faith of some kind. And they need to understand that we cut across all communities in terms of our race. We are no different other than the colour of our skin. But that seems to be something that holds us back.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And that brings me straight to Dr. Victor. I want to talk a little bit about this issue of enforcement and community engagement. The Black community sees the police as an enforcement organization. you as a senior officer within the, as a former senior officer within the police, when you were engaging with the community, how did the community see you? I mean, you've mentioned that they called you names and all that, and so you were kind of in between. When you left the police, did you see any changes in this enforcement versus community engagement between the police and the community, the black community?
Yes, I did do. So there's lots of things here, and I'll try not to get it too complicated, but there's stereotypes around certain geographical areas, for example. So let's take the last place that I worked in an operational role. People will often say Tottenham, and they will associate Tottenham with violence, but also associate Tottenham with blackness. So you end up in this really difficult position where people think, oh, Tottenham, it must be really violent. And the reason why it's violent is because there's black people there. And the reason why because there's black people there, then they commit crime. So it's a high crime area. Mm-hmm. So externally, that is really problematic because people who want to invest don't come and invest there. People who can shop don't come and shop there. So if you've got black businesses there, they don't make as much money as you would do in areas where you haven't got black businesses. But if we come to the police, you'll have police officers who never lived in London, transferring, police officers who live in London but never worked in somewhere like Tottenham. And I can use the same example for places like Lambeth and Brixton, never worked there, but they very quickly get this stereotype that if I'm posted there, I'm going to have to be tougher than I am anywhere else. Yeah. And you have some specialist unit who think if they're being sent there, we're being sent there to go and actually be really forceful. And as a borough commander in Haringey, one of my constant challenges was to have a conversation with my officers to say, black people are not any more aggressive or any more violent than non-black people. So I'll give you an example. Some of the things that were taking place, Broadwater Farm, which is a notorious place, and one of our colleagues was brutally murdered there in a riot. But equally, there's a stereotype that the place is just violent and aggressive. And some of my officers will say to me, if they get a call to Broadwater Farm, they will go in 2 vehicles any time of day. So I'm saying, why is that? Because it's violent. Why is it violent? Because there's a history. But you going to a call during the day is not violent, any more violent than going anywhere else in Haringey. You just create this impression that it's violent. You go running in there. And when you speak to the people, the residents there, which I did do on many occasions, the vast majority of them are everyday folk. They want the police to protect them. They respect the institution of policing, and they want those people wearing the uniform to treat them with dignity. That's all they ask for. Now, there are 1 or 2 people, younger people, who scream and shout at the police, call them names, taunt them. But you know what? I can take you to any town in Surrey. I can take you to any town in Manchester. I can take you to any town in, Kent. There will be people who scream at the police. Yeah? I worked, when I was seconded to the Home Office, I worked in a number of places around the country. Go to Liverpool. I worked in Toxteth. The young white boys there were more virulent than the young black boys that gave me jip in London. I worked in Cleveland. Some of the boys there, I say, they dislike the police because of the way the police behave, not me as a person. So you've got young white boys in Toxteth. You've got young Asian boys in parts of Cleveland. So this issue about small group of people disliking police officers who behave badly has got nothing to do with race, but it just keeps getting perpetuated. So in terms of engaging with the black community, I'll keep it to that. The black community were welcoming. And why was that? Because for once, they could say, we've got an officer that looks like us in a senior position. Yeah. And I've no doubt it was similar with Leroy when he was in Hackney. And I've no doubt it's similar with Janet when she goes places, and her position carries authority. black people say, yeah, we've got someone in position of authority. They don't want you to work miracles, but they just want to know that you can actually rise to those positions, you can have some influence, and they want to support you. And invariably, they do support you. Yeah. But what you hear in public is the complete difference. You know, the black people are going to turn against you. They're not going to like you. You're going to be ostracized. And these are all the stereotypes. It just feeds the negative and makes it really difficult. So in answer to your question, David, I think the black community respect the institution of policing. They want the police as an institution to treat them fairly, to treat them with dignity, and more importantly, to explain what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if they can explain what they're doing, they will understand. Because one of the things that, in my view, we don't do as a group of black people is hold the police to account as a public body. We don't have to shout at them. We don't have to do anything. We just need to hold them to account. So if I go back to Haringey, there are parts in Haringey where you've got wealthy, middle-class white people. And do you know what? Collectively, they will ask the borough commander to justify why there's a high incidence of vehicle crime in where they live.
Yeah.
But the black community who suffer the same won't do that. And I was constantly trying to encourage them. All you need to do is a collective voice. Hold me to account. Hold any borough commander to account. You're entitled to do that because you pay your council tax, you pay your rates. The police is a public service. By doing that, they've got to respond to you. And I think that's something we need to do as serving police officers, retired police officers, how we encourage the black community to actually use the influence and the power and the right that they have just to ask for the police to explain what they're doing, why they're doing it, and what they're hoping to get out of it. Not in a challenging way, not critical, just talk to them what they're getting out of it and how they can work with the community to better understand that some of their behavior creates problems.
I think, thank you so much for saying that. Let me go to Leroy because we're going to be rounding up, quite soon. Dr. Leroy, you've written a book, Closing the Ranks. Of course, you've closed your ranks because you've now retired. And your life as a cop. And if I look at that, I'm thinking to myself, what is it that you want young people that are out there who are thinking of joining the police force in the UK? What do you want to get out of this, your experience that you've had? But also for the officers who are currently serving, because you were investigated as a black senior officer during your time. And then the case was dropped, or you may explain much more about that. But your book, Your Life as a Cop, in the time when George Floyd was murdered in the streets of Minnesota by a white police officer. How do you see the way forward, Dr. Leroy?
I'm only getting intermittent signals at the moment, but I've got the gist of your question.
Yes.
And basically, I think the ethos that I'm taking from is we need to recognize that there is no order Met or any other that is a no-go area for black people. For all black people, if they want to respond to the calling, they should be able to do that and be judged on their merits and not to feel over.
Joseph, are we losing Dr. Leroy there?
Yes, we are experiencing a little bit
Because,
of
again,
connection problem. So
that's fine. Yeah.
you can continue
Yes. Let me
asking somebody else while he sorts
yes.
the...
Is Dr. Leroy there?
Daniel White County. Yeah, still there. The book.
He's running a reggae session.
Yeah, I'm sorry about this.
Yeah, that's all right.
But basically, do you want me to continue?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. Janet, let me jump to you while Dr. Leroy is trying to sort out his his computer. I'm sure that the audience would understand. Sometimes the weather could be could affect this connection. Now, Janet, I mean, you are the only one in this forum, in this panel that is still currently serving. And at this point in time, you've got COVID-19. And then you've got these, the unfortunate circumstances of the Black Lives Matter protest. The Black communities out there, they are enraged. How are you rebuilding this trust within the Black community? And what are you telling them in terms of protecting themselves, for this COVID-19, while fighting for the Black Lives Matter protest? I mean, what are you saying to them?
So I think it's amazing that in a time when we are going through a global pandemic, that we have got people from all ethnicities that are prepared to risk their lives to protest about Black Lives Matters. So for me, that sends the strongest message you could ever want to hear in terms of policing, but also in terms of some of the other institutions like education and health. So right there, I think it has hit home to those institutions and government what this means in terms of our community's understanding and the lack of understanding from those institutions. From that perspective, I would say that policing have sought to ensure that they are engaging, they're explaining, and leaving the enforcement bit right to the very end. So you've had a range of stories where police officers have come under attack and they have not been enforcing as we'd expect to see. Because actually that is the messaging from policing, because they accept that people have a right to protest. What I would say to the protesters coming out is that clearly the police want to police a peaceful protest. And I know that that is the messaging coming out from the organisers in terms of that. So that's what we would want to continue. And at the same time, because we are going through this pandemic, we would want to see that people are taking the necessary steps to keep themselves safe. And they are absolutely doing that. But as I said, it's astounding to see the fact that people are prepared to come out in such large numbers. I think one of the weekend protests was 15,000 people present, and they're willing to come out and do their protest and do it peacefully in terms of what they see is a really key issue around Black Lives Matters. From a policing perspective, and being a Black female, and some of the members that are BPA, we feel it too. We feel the weight of the job that we do really coming into question, and the aspect that Victor talks about around accountability really having to be pushed again in terms of police interaction with communities. And whether that be through, stop and search, which we know is a constant thing, which we also know, as Victor was alluding to, that people don't complain. If people have what they feel is a resented stop, they're not going to go to a police station or online to complain about it. But we know they exist. And with the introduction of ITs, people got phone. I mean, Leroy talked about body worn, but what we're seeing now is more community members have a mobile phone with a camera on. And if they know that, or they suspect because it's their lived experience that they're walking past the police and all it has to do is that you have to look away or you look like you're doing something is enough. That they've already got their phones up and running with the cameras on and they're recording more. And that is why we're able to see more about those engagements and those interactions, which, you know, before it was like one word against the other, but now we've got visual evidence that is demonstrating that actually some of the police engagement isn't at the level we would expect to see it at. Yeah, and that is where we need to be holding the police service and other agencies to account in this regard.
Yeah, just one last question to you, Janet. Who do you complain to? Who should the black communities be complaining to? To the police themselves? Should they complain to?
So there is a number of ways you can complain. You can go into the police station, you can complain to the IOPC, and you can complain to the MPS online. So there's a number of online ways you can complain, which is just to, you know, say what the interaction was, time, date, that kind of thing. But, you know, those, and you can do it for a third party as well. It doesn't have to be you. It can be someone that does it on your behalf. So there are a number of ways that you can connect into policing, but we need to hear people's voices. We need to understand why there is.
Are those complaints being dealt with? Complaining is one thing. Are they being responded to?
Don't get me wrong, they are being responded to, but what I'd want to see is that there's more of an outcome in terms of those complaints, because we know, and again, that boils down to the people that you've got with the lens that are looking at it. So in that regard, I would definitely say that you need people with a lens around the lived experience that understand the complaint that's coming through, so that they are dealt with more robustly. Because right from my perspective, you know, when I see a complaint being resolved, I wouldn't be happy with it. So that is probably why people sit and they think, I'm not going to bother because nothing gets done. But if you do complain, if we do see the sort of behaviours that are being complained about, that will be dealt with. Every complaint is dealt with. Whether it's to the standard we'd want to see, probably not. But they do get dealt with.
Thank you very much, Janet. Dr. Victor, let me get to you. Yes.
No.
Let me have it with Dr. Victor. Dr. Victor, you've had this experience, for decades. You've seen the Brixton Riots, as I said. You've seen the London riots, and now you've also witnessed the George Floyd riots. Do you see this as just another riot, or you see a difference in this one? And what are your prospects?
Well, I genuinely hope that this one is different. I mean, I see a difference here because of the nature of the people who are coming out to demonstrate. They're all ages, they're all ethnicity, they're all nationality, and they're all social background. So I see a difference. And I also see a real determination to keep with the discussion. So there's been lots of attempts to move it on to statues, kneeling, and now we're talking about, people not following lockdown and having raves. There's every attempt to move it away from the topic. The topic is racism, unequal treatment of both police officers and the community. So I'm seeing a real difference, and it's a real opportunity for all of us. The three of us here can make a massive difference. Just keep the topic or the conversation on the subject. And I see that happening. And there's more and more people who are taking an interest, and we've just got to keep it focused. And I genuinely hope that someday, and I'm not going to sound too dramatic, we can all live to the words of Martin Luther King. We can have black officers as chief constables, even as a commissioner, as senior officers, because of their talent and not because of anything else.
Thank you very much, Dr. Victor. Dr. Leroy, you're there. Can you just conclude for 1 minute with us and tell us about your book and how you see your book being relevant, during this time when you have George Floyd protest? Just give us 1 minute about your book and how the audience can get hold of it.
Well, it's been published on the 17th of September. The publishers are SPCK. You can get it on pre-order with Amazon and Waterstones, and it's
so I think we've lost.
Saying, despite all the black community externally, we still got a long.
I think we're losing Dr. Leroy there because of the network. Is he still there? So I think what we'll do is we'll round up. If you want to get hold of Dr. Leroy's book, you can go on Waterstone. The title of the book is called Closing Rant by Leroy Logan. The book is going to be out in September. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for your time. I want to thank Janet Hills, who was the former first chair of the Black Police Association and the president of the National Black Police Association. She's a current detective sergeant serving at the Metropolitan Police. I also want to give my gratitude to my able Leroy Logan, who is a member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, MBE. But also thanks to Dr. Victor Olicia, who is King's Police Medalist. And, within these three individuals, they have enormous experiences within the police force. You heard. We will bring them again because we want them to empower the Black community. We want them to also empower policing in the UK so that policing in the UK can become an inclusive service to serve and to protect. And so that we can continuously have that community engagement and building trust between the community, especially the Black community and the police service. We need the police. We also need the community. So the community is there for the police should be there for the community. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and have a good evening. We would see you again shortly. Thank you to Africans in London TV. And, thank you, Mr. Joseph, for your time. And, keep safe, keep your social distancing, and God bless you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, that was David Otto and the ladies and the gentlemen he has brought onto the program. These people are experienced. Basically, we need to hear more about them. So we're gonna stop here, but as I always say, the conversation must continue. We're gonna continue on social media, on Facebook. Basically, we need to hear more of your suggestions. David Otto is an expert in global counterterrorism and has got his own company called Global Risk International. If you have anything to do with terrorism or security, send him a note. Send him an email. I believe his website is globalriskinternational.co.uk, or if that doesn't work, try.com. And for now, we will see you next Thursday. So keep watching this space. But by the way, I had my friends watching from Brussels, from Switzerland, and from Kenya, of course. So we will see you next week.